Hi everybody and welcome back. Today I'm going to take some time to first discuss why theory matters. Then we're going to talk about how we can apply it to policy, and finally we're going to wrap up the lecture by going through a pretty detailed discussion of both deterrence theories and rational choice theory. This week we're talking about the really old school stuff. Deterrence and rational choice theory are two of the oldest criminological theories to date, and surprisingly we still use them even though there is little to no empirical support for really either one. However, before we get into the nitty-gritty details of the actual theories, we're going to first start with a discussion about the importance of criminological theory. So to begin with, let's first talk about criminological theory in sort of a broad sense. And when we're talking about theory, what we're really talking about is the study of why people commit crime or why they choose not to commit crime and be law-abiding citizens. Maybe it's a control issue. Maybe it's the fear of being victimized. Perhaps there's just too much to lose if I were to get caught here. So I'm just generally unwilling to break the law. There are a number of reasons, and this semester we're going to explore them all, and trust me, there are a ton of reasons why people choose to commit crime or choose not to. But really when we're talking about a good theory, what we're talking about is something that is based, at least in part, on some sort of empirical evidence. There may be behavioral patterns that the theorist was able to piece together and form the theory. But maybe other theorists have built their theories around more of the impact that law and policy have on individuals, and maybe less on actual behavioral patterns. And we're going to talk about both of those theories in depth throughout the semester. So let's say you're trying to find an explanation for violent crime. And most people are not waking up one morning and they're going to decide, I'm going to commit my very first battery today, right? Instead, there's typically a progression of behavior that culminates with the battery. So what our job as criminologists is to figure out what caused this person to escalate their behavior so much that it results in a battery. Was it the lack of parental attachment? This is what Travis Hershey might say when it comes to social bonding theory. Ron Akers might say that our individual behavior occurred because this person was hanging out with deviant peers and learned from them and started essentially imitating their behaviors. That's what social learning theory provides. Braithwaite might suggest that, guys, it doesn't matter how the behavior started, but the behavior has happened, and if we don't forgive and reintegrate this offender back into society, then this person is going to continue to reoffend, and it's the recidivism that we need to be most concerned about. That's reintegrative shaming theory in action, essentially. So as we're trying to figure out the same exact actions of an individual in this scenario, we have a variety of different explanations going on, right? Or possible explanations. But what I'm trying to do is account for the actions of this one single solitary individual. This is called a micro-level theoretical explanations. We're accounting for the actions of one individual person at the micro level. On the other hand, macro-level theories are providing explanations at the group level. You could be focusing on violent crime within the inner city neighborhoods, for instance. This semester, we're going to focus on both micro and macro level explanations of crime, but the best theory of crime is the one that is a general theory of crime. And there are several of those that we're going to talk about this semester as well. General theories of crime can provide an explanation for just about any type of criminal or deviant behavior. For instance, Ron Akers is very proud of the fact that social learning theory is one of the strongest theories around. His theory has been tested in trying to predict pornography use, binge drinking, theft, drug use, any types of violent and non-violent offenses, cyber-based crimes, really anything you want to throw out there. Ron says that social learning theory can explain it. His theory has a wide scope. It's able to be tested, and it has strong empirical validity. You don't want to come up with a theory that only accounts for the actions of young white girls in rural America, for instance, right? It's too nuanced, it's not generalizable, and it has a very narrow scope in terms of what it can explain. And that's exactly what you don't want. In the first chapter of the Akers, Sellers, and Jennings text, and that book is right here for those of you who have not purchased it yet, it looks like this. In the first chapter of that textbook, Akers, Sellers, and Jennings discuss all of these items in terms of what goes into creating a strong theory. So please review that part and figure out what a strong, broad scope is and what empirical validity means. I've sort of already explained it to you, but in that book, Akers and colleagues have really strong definitions of what these different terms mean and how they'll apply to a strong theory. Okay. So here's the time, or here's the moment in time in which I have to get real with you. Criminology and criminal justice are two very distinct fields, okay? Currently, you all are in a criminal justice program, but that differs significantly from a criminology program, and I'm going to tell you why. As criminologists, we like to theorize. I'm a criminologist. I came from a criminology program. We like to theorize, we like to research, and we like to discuss things in the abstract. But criminal justice professionals, they're looking to make things happen, and there's nothing wrong with either side of the discussion. But one is more academically inclined, one is more practitioner oriented. Okay, and we're in a program here that is more practitioner oriented, but we need to figure out the why and the how part of it in order to make this processual, to make the process easier for the criminal justice professional to put the knowledge into action. That's where I'm going. So one of the most concrete ways to be able to measure change in our profession is through the use of policy, right? That's what criminal justice professionals want to figure out. What type of policy is the best policy to stop crime, to rehabilitate offenders, and to really make the criminal justice system as a whole a better system, right? And I know that policies can take a while to change if the politicians aren't in agreement, right? But a good theory is based on, a good policy rather is based on theory, right? For example, in the Decker chapter you have to read this week, Decker points out that there is a very large gap between theory and policy. And many researchers call for the use of more behavioral-based theory to be incorporated into policy, but that politicians are often reluctant to incorporate or make these changes because they don't want to appear soft on crime, right? And that is traditionally the most substantive way in which a politician will just remove himself from the discussion of policy change. I need to get reelected. I don't want to appear soft on crime, so I'm going to do the polar opposite of what you're asking me to do because I don't want my constituents to think that I've gone soft, right? So instead of doing what researchers are trying to advocate for, politicians are relying on the really old school theories of deterrence and rational choice because they're seeing things in a black and white way, and they're seeing things in a different sort of way than researchers and theorists and other types of practitioners are. People choose to commit a crime, that's the end of it. If we make harsher laws, i.e. longer prison sentences, surrounding these specific crimes, then people aren't going to want to go away to prison for 10, 20, 30 years, and they're going to be sufficiently deterred. Just you watch, right? But we know this doesn't happen. People are not sufficiently deterred. We just hope we don't get caught. That's the problem, right? So what I really like about this Decker piece is that Scott focuses on a very distinct problem in this piece in which he suggests that theory can be influential, and then he tells you how to observe the problem with the eventual hope of reforming policy accordingly. All right? He gives you the how-to guide here, guys. Gang violence is the problem that he's focusing on. in this piece. It's a massive problem in a lot of towns and inside a lot of prisons. Gangs recruit young, and it's often difficult to get out of the gang once you're in. So what Decker does is he provides a theoretical model, a generic logic model that provides a plan to help agencies limit juvenile delinquency and subsequent victimization. He even suggests in this piece what the OJJDP needs to be doing in order to help facilitate this plan. Theory and policy need to work together and not butt heads and fight together all of the time. A good theoretically based policy is more effective than one that has no sort of empirical testing or one that is just flying off the cuff because we need a knee-jerk sort of solution to a problem that has been around for a long, long time. That being said, effective policy and theory need to work hand in hand. The majority of our policies today are centered around deterrence theory. In both the Akers text and the Cullen text, I have assigned you several readings that focus on the development of both deterrence and routine activity theories. I'm not going to get too far into these theories. You should have been exposed to them in your undergraduate programs at least at some point. But in a very brief review, remember that Beccaria and Bentham were some of the original proponents of deterrence theory, and they suggest that in order for people to be sufficiently deterred, that punishment needs to have 3 items or 3 tenets built into it. Punishment needs to be swift, certain, and severe in order for an individual to be sufficiently deterred. First, in terms of being swift, this means that punishment needs to happen quickly. If I commit a crime and I'm arrested and convicted within a few months and immediately begin serving my prison sentence, that is probably going to be swift enough. However, if I receive the death penalty and it's not enforced for 15 years later, Swift has left the house. Swift is no longer here. It has to be quick enough for the offender to connect the punishment to the crime. Just like with children, if your child is bad at school on Monday and you wait until Friday to punish them, you're not connecting the two fast enough for the individual. This also ties into the certainty of the punishment. Your child thought that he or she was getting away with something because they weren't punished immediately, right? Monday I did whatever, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday I haven't gotten punished. I got away with it. Friday rolls around and now you try to implement this punishment on me. Well, next time you may forget, right? I might try my luck in the future because I know I'm not going to get in trouble right away, but maybe this time I'll get away with it for sure and mom or dad won't remember to punish me on Friday, right? So there is the expectation that punishment will either be delayed or maybe I'm not even going to get punished at all, right? That's certainty. How likely is it that I will be punished? For the death row inmate who's been sitting there for 15 years, it's not very certain at all, right? I can still appeal, I can be pardoned, my sentence can be commuted at the last second, or I could even be found actually innocent. I see it happening to other people. There's the possibility it could happen to me as well. There's absolutely nothing certain about the death penalty anymore, and it's a large part of the reason why it doesn't work as a punishment. Finally, severity, our third tenet within the frame of deterrence theory. Severity means that in order to deter someone from their punishment, their punishment can't be too severe and it can't be too lenient either. This is the Goldilocks element, right? Punishment has to be just right in terms of severity. If I were to receive life in prison for my very first non-violent offense, I don't have any criminal history beyond what I just did, right? And that's what gets me life in prison. You can make the argument that it's way too severe, right? This punishment is not going to be held up in court. Some court somewhere is going to overturn this because my 8th Amendment rights were violated. I don't take this seriously at all, right? That is just way too much punishment for my very first non-violent type of offense. But then on the flip side, if I only got a fine for burning down someone's house out of anger, right, in arson, then the argument can be made that I am being much too lenient. No one's going to care about a fine, right? And everything's going to be on fire next. So you have to find that happy medium, or what we call the proportional punishment. Akers, Sellers, and Jennings go on to discuss that for the most part, we're not deterred. Okay? The individuals who are deterred are already informally deterred. As an individual, I wouldn't be committing crimes to begin with. Personally, I'm a rule follower. Okay? So no matter what you do in terms of punishment, I'm not going to be committing crimes. So this does not affect me, right? Those who are not deterred will not be deterred no matter what you increase that punishment to. They're still going to commit crimes because they don't think they're going to get caught. So is there empirical support for deterrence? No. Limited to none out there. But we still keep using this. Rational choice, on the other hand, is less about the punishment and more about that momentary decision making. Rational choice theory does play a role in a discussion of criminal behavior, but we also see this theory being used in economic and political decision making as well. That's because it uses the expected utility principle. The expected utility principle suggests that people make their decisions based on how much they stand to gain or profit compared to how much they're going to lose. It's basically a cost-benefit analysis, right? It's a gamble of sorts. If I commit a crime, I do stand to lose my freedom for a significant amount of time if I get caught. However, if I risk it, then I have the potential to gain a lot of money from selling these drugs on the street, right? If that's the crime I decide that I'm going to engage in. So it's a cost-benefit analysis. The theory suggests that individuals are reasoning actors who weigh means and ends, costs and benefits, and eventually they come to a rational choice to engage in criminal behavior. The problem with this theory is that it places too much emphasis on the individual's thought process and does not take into account things that happen in the spur of the moment, and it does not take into account things that happen while the individual is under the influence, for instance. This also assumes the idea that offenders are thinking in terms of the long term rather than in the present when the temptation of money or stolen property is the main driving factor. For many revolving door offenders, they're never thinking about things in the long term. They're more worried about what will happen in the next week or in the next month. They're not worried about what's happening a year from now. They're worried about today. And part of this might just be lack of concern about the future. Or it could mean desperation. Think about how many offenders come out of prison every single day and almost immediately go back in because they panic, they don't know how to live on the outside, they're unprepared to live in family life, they've been this pariah for so many years, they're trying to find their way back in with their family and friends after being gone for so long. And sometimes when they're on the outside and re-entry is becoming a very difficult process for them, they're so desperate to make it that eventually they rely on the only skills that they may have, which are illegitimate skills. And so this is not taking into account a rational choice. This is only the desperation that's speaking. For me and for many other criminological researchers, rational choice theory isn't complex enough to take into account the many different issues that individuals could face, and it doesn't take into account the reasons for why people might commit crime. It's too black and white, right? And we know that people always are operating within that gray area. That's why it's considered a classical theory. We used it once before, and it doesn't have as much merit as the others, so we acknowledge it, but we don't use it to the same extent that we use more modern theories. Deterrence is the one exception. It isn't frequently used by researchers, just by politicians and policymakers. These two theories are relatively easy to understand in terms of their conceptualization, so I'm not spending a lot of time really going in depth through them the way I will the others. Your textbook is going to, well, two textbooks. I already showed you the Acres one, and then here is the Cullen text. Let me hold this up for you real quick. So if you haven't gotten the Cullen text, this is the other textbook that you should be buying. Your two textbooks offer significantly detailed explanations of the two theories. So this is something that you should be focusing on. If you haven't already caught on to what the theories are promoting, you should be focusing on the details of the theories as you move through your weekly readings and through your weekly summaries as well. Work together in your groups to really break down the nuances of what the authors are trying to discuss in those summaries. And next week, what we're going to do is we're going to jump right on into this discussion of classical biological theories, and then we're going to segue into one of the most modern theories that the field of criminology is using right now, biosocial theory. Biosocial criminology is really taking off, and it's becoming one of the biggest movements within the discipline that we've seen in a pretty long time. So next week, meet me back here, and we're going to jump into some of the heaviest hitting theories that attempt to explain criminal behavior from first a genetic source and then from a socially deterministic point of view. So thank you everybody for your time and attention, and I look forward to meeting you back here next week when we jump into some of the more dense theories. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.